How to speak like the 1% elite. Speak slowly, think deeply. There is something quietly powerful about a person who isn't rushing to fill the silence. The truly wise speak slowly, not because they lack thoughts, but because they value precision over noise. Choose words with surgical precision. The most persuasive communicators are not verbose, they are selective. Each word is placed like a chess piece, intentional, strategic, and often carrying more weight than what is said aloud. Ask questions that reveal thoughtfulness. The elite don't impress by answering everything. They impress by asking the kinds of questions that stop you in your tracks and make you think, why didn't I ask that myself? Master the art of understatement. True confidence whispers. The elite rarely feel the need to announce their achievements. They speak with the quiet authority of someone who's already arrived. Reference ideas, not just opinions. They root their insights not in the fleeting winds of opinion, but in the enduring soil of ideas, philosophy, history, behavioral science, literature. This is not pretense. It's intellectual grounding. Embrace the power of listening. The 1% often dominate conversations not by speaking, but by listening, deeply, intentionally, and with a curiosity that invites revelation. Avoid absolutes. Signal nuance. Where others see black or white, they speak in gradients. It depends, they might say, not as a hedge, but as a mark of intellectual maturity. Modulate tone with emotional control. In times of volatility, economic, social, emotional, their voices remain steady. They are not the loudest in the room, but their calmness commands attention. Tell stories that illuminate, not exaggerate. They weave stories not for entertainment alone, but for instruction, for legacy. The best stories are the ones that quietly embed wisdom between the lines, speak less, mean more. If there's one trait the truly elite share, it's that they never speak merely to be heard. They speak to make meaning, and they know that sometimes silence says the most. There's a subtle kind of confidence in someone who's not in a hurry to speak. In a world obsessed with speed, of data, decisions, and dialogue, the person who slows down to express a thought becomes magnetic. Their words don't race to compete with noise. They settle into the silence like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that linger long after they've finished speaking. When someone speaks slowly, it signals deliberation. It reveals that what they're saying has passed through an inner filter of reflection. This isn't slowness born of hesitation, but one that comes from a respect for language. It's an invitation to listen not just to the content of what's said, but to the intentionality behind it. Pausing before speaking also demonstrates a kind of intellectual humility. It shows a willingness to let the thought unfold fully before presenting it to the world, and in that space, between stimulus and response, wisdom takes root. The silence isn't empty, it's charged with thought, and that makes the eventual words feel earned rather than impulsive. Many of the most persuasive thinkers don't rush to respond, they absorb. They let others speak, and then when they do offer their voice, it carries the weight of someone who's not just reacting but distilling. Their cadence slows the room, not because they demand attention, but because they honor the attention they've been given. There is something almost meditative about a person who is deeply present in their speech. Their voice doesn't jolt, it resonates. There is no performance in their tone, no urgency to dazzle or dominate. Instead, there's a kind of stillness, a composure that tells you their words have passed through layers of clarity and care. Speaking slowly allows space for precision. It's a subtle discipline to resist the temptation to rush, to fill every moment with sound. That discipline is often born from a life of reading, of reflection, of wrestling with ideas not just for argument's sake, but to better understand the world and one's place in it. What's fascinating is that the impact of slow speech isn't about theatrics. It's not about dragging syllables or dramatizing pauses. It's about alignment. When the pace of your speech matches the pace of your thought, something honest emerges. It's not rehearsed, it's real. There's also a generosity in slowing down. It gives the listener room to meet the speaker halfway. Each phrase becomes a shared experience rather than a monologue. This kind of exchange builds trust, not just in the message, but in the person delivering it. Speaking slowly invites others to think alongside you. It's as though the speaker is saying, "Come with me. Let's walk through this idea together." That inclusiveness transforms speech into a conversation, even if only one person is speaking. It draws people in, not through force, but through presence. In the end, speaking slowly is not about style, it's about substance. It reflects a life that values thought over reaction, clarity over volume. And in a world where attention is scarce and voices are many, that kind of speech becomes quietly revolutionary. In the hands of a thoughtful speaker, language becomes a tool of discipline, not indulgence. Words are not scattered freely but chosen carefully, each one bearing a responsibility. There's an economy of expression that reveals a deeper kind of mastery, where silence isn't feared and verbosity isn't mistaken for insight. A well-placed phrase can land with more force than a paragraph. There is immense power in brevity when it's paired with precision. These are not just fewer words, they are better words. Words that carry intention, sharpened by restraint, and delivered without excess ornament. They land like brushstrokes on a blank canvas, sparse but unforgettable. When someone speaks with precision, there's an absence of clutter. They don't waste language trying to sound intelligent. They focus on being understood. It's not about showing off vocabulary. It's about achieving clarity. Each word becomes a point of light, guiding the listener toward meaning without distraction. Such precision comes from a habit of thinking before speaking. It requires the willingness to revise mentally, to eliminate the unnecessary, to resist the impulse to impress. It's a quiet discipline, rare but unmistakable, and it signals something profound. The speaker values the listener's time and their own credibility. There's a certain elegance in language that doesn't try too hard. The most compelling communicators speak in a way that feels clean. No flourishes, no filler, just the essence of what must be said. And paradoxically, that simplicity feels sophisticated. It's not minimalism for its own sake. It's intentionality. The analogy of a chessboard is apt. Just as a grandmaster doesn't move without purpose, a skilled speaker doesn't speak without aim. Words become moves, each one with consequences, each one shifting the tone, direction, and energy of a conversation. There's no randomness in that kind of speech, only strategy. Sometimes the most powerful part of a sentence is what's left unsaid. When speech is crafted with precision, the pauses and spaces between words speak volumes. They give weight to what's present by making room for interpretation, reflection, and sometimes reverence. To choose words with care is also to show respect for the listener, for the subject, and for oneself. It reflects a belief that language matters, that it's not just a means of communication, but a reflection of character. Loose words can betray loose thinking. Sharp words reveal sharp minds. The speakers we remember, the ones who change how we think, rarely speak in torrents. They speak in truths, distilled. Their voice becomes not just a source of information, but a vessel for something much rarer, wisdom. And wisdom doesn't shout. It speaks cleanly, purposefully, and without waste. In the end, it's not about sounding clever, it's about being exact. In a world flooded with speech, the person who speaks with surgical precision offers something increasingly rare, the dignity of intentional thought, expressed in words that matter. There's a quiet strength in the person who doesn't rush to offer opinions, but instead leads with a question, one that gently dismantles assumptions and reorients the entire conversation. This is not the questioning of interrogation, but of exploration. A signal that the speaker isn't just reacting, they're thinking. Thoughtful questions are rarely loud or aggressive. They are subtle and penetrating. They carry with them a sense of curiosity that disarms rather than challenges. Often, the best questions feel obvious only in hindsight, so obvious that they make others pause and wonder why such clarity hadn't occurred to them earlier. What makes a question powerful isn't its complexity, but its depth. It's not about sounding philosophical or clever. It's about noticing what others have missed. The best questions stem from careful listening, from absorbing what's being said and then finding the hidden layer beneath it. They're born out of patience, not performance. People who ask great questions don't seek to control the conversation. They seek to understand it more fully. They're less concerned with proving their intelligence and more interested in revealing new perspectives. And in doing so, they raise the quality of dialogue for everyone involved. There's a certain humility embedded in the act of asking. It acknowledges that there's more to learn, more to uncover. This humility doesn't diminish the speaker, it elevates them. Because to ask well is to signal discernment, the ability to know what matters and what's missing. In elite circles, the sharpest minds are often the quietest until they ask a question, and when they do, it often reframes the entire conversation. Their questions don't demand answers, they invite reflection. They shift the room from debate to discovery. To ask questions that reveal thoughtfulness is to take the conversation to a higher level, not by adding more, but by refining what's already there. It's a kind of conversational editing, stripping away what's superficial to get closer to what's essential. It shows not just what you know, but how you think. These kinds of questions don't just influence others, they change them. They plant seeds that continue to grow long after the conversation ends. That's the mark of true intellectual influence. Not telling someone what to think, but leading them to think differently on their own. Asking well also requires courage. The courage to appear uncertain, the courage to hold back from delivering an answer, and instead shine a light on something unspoken. That restraint reveals confidence. It shows you're not rushing to occupy space, but to shape it meaningfully. In the end, the most thoughtful questions don't come from a desire to impress. They come from a desire to understand, and it's this quiet intention, the pursuit of clarity over dominance, that distinguishes the truly elite. There's a particular elegance in those who let their presence speak louder than their resume. They don't list their accomplishments or decorate their language with self-importance. Instead, they speak with a calm assurance, as if to say, I don't need to prove anything to you because nothing is missing. That's the heart of understatement, knowing your worth and choosing not to parade it. In a culture addicted to self-promotion, understatement feels almost subversive. It resists the urge to impress. It lets achievement sit in the background, quietly supporting the speaker's credibility without ever demanding attention. This restraint doesn't come from insecurity, it comes from deep security. Understatement is not the absence of substance, it's the refusal to inflate it. The most compelling individuals often downplay their status, even their brilliance. Not because they doubt it, but because they've come to understand that real influence doesn't need to be advertised. It reveals itself through consistency, depth, and a certain unshakable tone. This kind of communication creates space for others. There's no overpowering ego in the room, just presence, just poise. When someone speaks in this manner, they're not asking for admiration. They're offering insight, and because they're not trying to dominate, their voice naturally holds more weight. There is also a kind of clarity that comes with understatement. It trims the excess, filters out the dramatics, and focuses on the essence. The message isn't drowned in self-reference. It is distilled. Listeners find it refreshing because it invites them in instead of pushing a persona forward. The person who masters understatement doesn't need to win the room. They don't need to name, drop, or project superiority. Their strength is self-contained, and it's often in the quiet moments, an offhand remark, a brief comment, that their depth becomes unmistakably clear. Understatement carries an implicit message, I could say more, but I don't need to. That gap between what's spoken and what's held back adds intrigue. It creates a sense of mystery, of depth yet unexplored, and that's far more compelling than any overt display of success. This way of speaking reflects emotional intelligence. It suggests the speaker knows how they're being perceived, but doesn't feel the need to control that perception. Instead, they let others draw their own conclusions, often more generous and respectful than any self-promotion could produce. In elite circles, those who overstate are often signaling insecurity, while those who understate are signaling mastery. Because when you've truly arrived, you realize that the loudest thing you can say is sometimes nothing at all. To speak with understatement is to lead without force, to inspire without spectacle. It's the art of letting others discover your strength rather than declaring it. And in a world of noise, that restraint carries its own quiet authority. There's a noticeable difference between someone who is simply well-informed and someone who is deeply anchored. The latter speaks not from the churn of daily commentary, but from concepts that have endured. When they speak, they draw from reservoirs built over time, from the thinkers, disciplines, and traditions that continue to shape how we see the world. Referencing ideas isn't about showing off erudition, it's about giving structure to thought. It transforms opinion into something more enduring, something with roots. Instead of saying, "I think," they might say, "This reminds me of a tension Tocqueville noticed," or Kahneman would frame this in terms of cognitive bias. That framing doesn't obscure the message, it sharpens it. There's a grounding force in someone who thinks in terms of frameworks, not just feelings. They're not reacting, they're integrating. Their speech becomes more than a string of assertions. It becomes a map, linking the present moment to deeper patterns that have existed for generations. When someone draws on philosophy, or literature, or psychology, they signal that they've done the work. They've read, they've wrestled with complexity, and they've emerged not with slogans, but with synthesis. That kind of perspective isn't just interesting, it's stabilizing. It helps others make sense of uncertainty. The use of ideas also adds humility to speech. It shows a recognition that wisdom isn't born in a vacuum, that we're all part of a lineage of thinkers, writers, teachers. Referencing ideas gives credit to that lineage. It places one's own thinking in context, acknowledging what's been borrowed, questioned, adapted. It also invites others to engage on a higher plane. When someone references an idea, it's a kind of intellectual generosity, an invitation to consider, to challenge, to expand. The conversation moves from what we feel to what we can examine, from personal preference to shared inquiry. And yet there's a subtlety to this. The ideas must serve the message, not overpower it. It's not about name-dropping or academic display. It's about using the right lens to sharpen focus. The reference exists not to impress, but to clarify. This kind of speech often has a timeless quality. It doesn't expire with the next news cycle. It lingers because it's built on something more stable than trend or opinion. The listener walks away not just with a new perspective, but with a new lens, something portable, something they can apply again and again. What's also striking is how this approach reflects long-term thinking. The person who speaks from ideas sees beyond the moment. They're not just reacting to the now, they're aligning with the enduring, and in a world obsessed with immediacy, that kind of speech feels both rare and essential. Ultimately, referencing ideas is not about sounding intellectual, it's about speaking with depth. It's the difference between a leaf blown by the wind and a tree rooted in the earth. One moves constantly. The other stands still, but holds the landscape together. There's something disarming about a person who listens with their full attention, who doesn't interrupt, doesn't prepare their reply while you're still speaking, but instead offers the rare gift of presence. In elite circles, this kind of listening isn't a weakness. It's a quiet power that draws others in, signaling a depth of self-assurance that doesn't need to constantly assert itself. The best listeners create a space where people feel safe to be honest. Their silence isn't passive, it's active. It encourages clarity in others, almost like a mirror that reflects thought back more cleanly than when it was first spoken. In their presence, people often say things they didn't even realize they believed until the moment they heard themselves articulate it. This kind of listening isn't about collecting data. It's about sensing nuance. It's a skill honed over time to detect tone, subtext, and intention. You start to notice what isn't said, where the pauses fall, how the energy shifts. That sensitivity becomes a kind of intelligence, emotional, strategic, relational. True listening requires restraint. It demands that we suppress the urge to interject with our own stories, opinions, or solutions. It's about giving others the dignity of being heard without immediately being judged or corrected. That restraint is what makes a listener feel rare and trustworthy. In the rooms where real influence happens, the person who speaks the least often understands the most. They are curators of insight. By listening well, they collect patterns, recognize signals, and wait for the right moment to speak, when what they say will carry weight, because it's born from understanding, not impulse. Listening is also a signal of curiosity. It says, you matter, your experience matters. That message alone elevates the quality of a conversation. It shifts the dynamic from transactional to transformational. The listener isn't trying to win, they are trying to learn. And that, paradoxically, makes them far more persuasive. The power of listening is that it reveals who truly has control. Those who constantly need to speak often betray a subtle insecurity, a fear of silence, of not being noticed. But those who can remain quiet, who can observe, who can wait, they command the room without effort. Their attention becomes influence. There's also a discipline to listening without agenda. It's easy to listen when we're just waiting for our turn. It's harder to listen without needing to speak at all. But when someone does this consistently, they become someone others seek out. Not just to talk to, but to think with. Listening well also makes speech more potent. When you've absorbed what others have said, when you've truly heard their fears, doubts, and hopes, your words can meet them where they are, not from above, but beside. That alignment is what makes communication feel profound rather than performative. Ultimately, the most effective communicators are often the ones who speak the least, but listen the best. Because listening isn't just a passive act. It's a tool of connection, of perception, of influence. And in a world flooded with voices, the one who listens deeply becomes the one worth listening to. The mark of a refined thinker is not how firmly they assert, but how thoughtfully they qualify. In a world that rewards certainty, it's tempting to speak in absolutes, to reduce complexity to slogans, to declare sweeping truths. But those who truly understand the terrain resist this temptation. They trade in nuance, not noise. It depends is not a weak answer. It's an honest one. It signals that the speaker is considering variables, context, trade-offs. It reflects a deeper understanding of how decisions are made, not in a vacuum, but in a world filled with shifting dynamics and competing truths. Nuance requires courage. It's far easier to sound bold than to sound balanced, but balance, when earned, is far more compelling. It shows that the speaker has thought through the angles, not just memorized a position. It reflects the discipline of someone who is not trying to win an argument, but trying to get it right. Those who avoid absolute signal an important kind of restraint. They understand that the world is rarely binary, that wisdom often lies in the tension between opposites. Instead of asking, is this right or wrong, they ask, under what circumstances might this make sense? That shift in framing reveals maturity. This approach also invites better dialogue. By signaling openness, not dogma, it allows room for others to engage. The conversation becomes less about defending a position and more about refining it. And in that space, better thinking emerges, not from confrontation, but from collaboration. The avoidance of absolutes is not about indecision. It's about discernment. It's knowing that most truths exist on a spectrum, and that what's useful in one scenario may be disastrous in another. This kind of flexibility doesn't dilute insight, it strengthens it by anchoring it in reality. Elite communicators understand that simple answers are rarely sufficient. They may use clear language, but their clarity doesn't come from oversimplification. It comes from precision, from naming the trade-offs, from showing that real choices often involve competing goods, not obvious villains. This style of speech builds trust. Listeners sense that the speaker is not just trying to sound certain, but to be accurate, and in a world filled with overconfidence, that humility becomes magnetic. It suggests not only knowledge, but wisdom, the kind of wisdom that knows its own limits. When someone says, "it depends," and then walks you through the conditions, you feel guided rather than pushed. You're not being sold a viewpoint, you're being shown a map. That map may not offer shortcuts, but it gives you something far more valuable, direction grounded in reality. In the end, those who avoid absolutes aren't afraid to be misunderstood in the short term. They're aiming for something longer lasting, because they know that real understanding is rarely found at the extremes. It's found in the gray space where thought is slower, more careful, and infinitely more rewarding. There is a certain gravity in the voice that does not waver, even when the world around it does. In moments of tension or uncertainty, most people raise their volume, their pitch, their urgency, but those who operate from a place of emotional discipline do the opposite. They lower the temperature of the room not by force, but by presence. This isn't about detachment or coldness. It's about modulation, knowing when to apply softness, when to pause, when to speak with firmness, but not fury. That range, that emotional control, is not innate. It's practiced, and its impact is profound. It signals that the speaker is not ruled by the moment, but anchored in something deeper. A calm voice carries farther than a loud one. Especially when others are spiraling, the speaker who remains measured becomes a point of orientation. Their steadiness signals not apathy but mastery, a rare ability to contain emotion without suppressing it, to feel without being overrun. This emotional restraint isn't a denial of feeling, it's a respect for timing. The best communicators know that the tone of delivery shapes the meaning of words. A sharp message delivered with serenity lands differently. It allows others to stay open rather than become defensive. In high-stakes environments, boardrooms, negotiations, public forums, the ability to control tone becomes a quiet superpower. It conveys leadership without having to declare it. People take their emotional cues from those who seem least shaken, least reactive. And so, the composed voice becomes the emotional barometer for everyone else. There's also a kind of ethical elegance in this approach. It says, "I will not use volume to overpower you. I will use clarity and calm to reach you." That choice, subtle as it is, changes the nature of influence. It transforms persuasion from pressure to poise. Calm speech doesn't mean monotone, it means aligned. The voice matches the message, the energy matches the moment. That congruence builds trust, because the audience senses this person is not pretending. They are practicing something real. When volatility rises, most chase control through intensity. But the elite understand, control is not something you seize, it's something you embody, and emotional control begins with tone. A voice that remains steady, even under strain, sends a message far louder than its decibel level. This self-possession isn't about dominance, it's about grace. It reveals that the speaker is not trying to win a performance. They're trying to be of use. And that utility, that steadiness, makes them the person others turn to when things begin to unravel. In the end, modulating tone is not about style, it's about responsibility. The calm voice becomes a kind of emotional architecture in chaos. It gives others something to hold onto, and that, especially in turbulent times, is what sets true communicators apart. The most compelling storytellers don't chase applause. They chase understanding. They know a well-laced story can carry more weight than data, more clarity than analysis. But their stories don't aim to dazzle. They aim to illuminate. Their purpose is not to inflate ego, but to transmit something lasting. These are not stories told for effect. They're shared with precision, chosen not because they are dramatic, but because they are revealing. They capture a principle, a paradox, a quiet truth. In the hands of a refined speaker, a story becomes a container for wisdom, not dressed up, but distilled. There's a humility in this form of storytelling. It avoids embellishment because it doesn't need to impress. What matters is not how remarkable the story makes the speaker seem, but how deeply it helps the listener see. The story becomes a vehicle, not a stage. Good stories slow the listener down. They bypass argument and enter through emotion. Without demanding agreement, they offer insight. They don't force a conclusion. They invite reflection. And often, they stay with the listener longer than any direct advice ever could. The best stories carry within them a kind of subtextual generosity. They are shared to serve, not to shine. Even if the speaker is part of the story, the attention subtly shifts to the lesson, to the implication. The ego recedes and the wisdom rises. This style of storytelling also reflects discipline. It takes restraint not to exaggerate for effect, not to rush the narrative, not to turn every moment into a punchline or a parable. But that restraint is what gives the story integrity. It holds its shape under scrutiny. Storytelling, when done this way, is a form of leadership. It transmits experience in a way that data never can. It allows listeners to inhabit a moment, to feel its tension, its weight, its turn. And in doing so, it doesn't just inform, it transforms. What's also striking is the quiet confidence this approach requires. The storyteller isn't trying to hook the audience with spectacle. They're trusting the substance, trusting that truth, simply told, will carry its own power, and it does. In elite circles, those who tell stories this way often become the ones others remember. Not because they were loudest or funniest, but because they gave something away, a perspective, a realization, a reminder. Their stories become reference points, anchors in other people's journeys. Ultimately, the difference is intent. Is the story there to elevate the speaker or to elevate the listener? The ones who speak like the elite choose the latter, and in doing so, their words become not just memorable, but meaningful. There is profound power in saying less and meaning more. Those who have mastered influence understand that every word carries weight. Too many words dilute that weight. They speak with purpose, not for volume, ensuring that when they do speak, what they say resonates deeply. In a culture fixated on constant expression, restraint becomes a radical act. The elite resist the temptation to fill every silence, knowing that silence itself can be a form of communication. A pause can create space for reflection, invite participation, or emphasize the gravity of what was just said. Speaking less also means listening more, of the room to the undercurrents, to the unsaid. When words are scarce, they are chosen with care, each one carrying intentional meaning. This economy of language commands attention because it respects the intelligence and time of the listener. There's a quiet confidence in those who do not feel compelled to prove their worth through endless talk. They understand that true influence is less about noise and more about clarity. Their speech is precise, distilled to its essence, and because of this, it carries undeniable authority. The decision to speak less is not about withholding information, but about prioritizing what truly matters. It's about cutting through distraction and focusing on the core message. This clarity offers a compass in conversations often cluttered by excess and superficiality. Moreover, silence can be a strategic tool. It creates tension and anticipation, allowing others to fill the gap with their own thoughts. This can lead to richer dialogue and deeper insight, as it encourages participation rather than domination. The ability to convey meaning with fewer words reflects a deep understanding of communication's purpose. It's not about impressing others with verbosity, but about connecting ideas with impact. The elite know that meaningful speech is a catalyst. It sparks thought, shifts perspectives, and inspires action. In many ways, speaking less is an act of generosity. It respects the listener's capacity to engage thoughtfully and honors the complexity of ideas by not reducing them to soundbites. This restraint elevates the conversation and those within it. Those who master this art often find that their words echo long after they are spoken. The silence that follows their speech holds space for reflection and integration, making their influence both immediate and enduring. Ultimately, the power of speaking less and meaning more lies in the ability to create space for thought, for connection, and for transformation. It's this space that defines the communication style of the truly elite. To speak like the 1% elite is not merely to adopt a style. It is to embody a mindset grounded in depth, discipline, and deliberate intent. It means approaching every conversation as an opportunity to build understanding rather than just to be heard. The elite recognize that words are not a currency to be spent recklessly, but a tool to be wielded with care, precision, and respect. This mastery of language reflects a broader mastery of thought, emotion, and presence. What sets the elite apart is their refusal to surrender to the noise of the moment. They resist the urge to fill silence, to shout over others, or to claim attention through volume alone. Instead, they cultivate patience, pausing to listen deeply, choosing words carefully, and allowing their speech to carry weight through nuance rather than blunt force. Their voice becomes a signal amid the static, a place of calm in a turbulent world. Underlying their speech is an intellectual humility that embraces complexity and rejects absolutes. They ground their insights in timeless ideas and invite dialogue rather than dictate answers. This openness does not weaken their position. It strengthens it, because it acknowledges the limits of certainty and the value of ongoing inquiry. In this way, their words become not just statements, but invitations to think more deeply. Equally vital is the emotional intelligence that shapes their tone. They do not react impulsively or let volatility dictate their expression. Instead, they remain steady, measured, and composed, offering a model of control that others instinctively respect. Their calmness is not silence born of fear, but a deliberate choice that commands attention through presence and poise. Ultimately, to speak like the 1% elite is to recognize that communication is an act of leadership. It requires courage, restraint, and generosity. It is about crafting messages that illuminate rather than overwhelm, that invite connection rather than demand agreement. Those who master this art do more than communicate. They inspire, influence, and leave a lasting legacy.